Hi, my name's Emma and this is Rob, and we're here with episode 4 of Hope and the City. We're delighted that you can join us, and on this episode we're speaking to a very special guest, Richard Garnett.
So Richard is speaking to us today about hope in the face of terminal illness. And actually, as we record this introduction, so we spoke to Richard 3 weeks ago. Richard's passed away now, which makes this episode you're about to hear, I think, even more poignant. He was very strong to the end. I think we interviewed him maybe only 3-4 days before he went to be with the Lord. And we really want to honour Freddie, Kit and Millie, his children. And so we're talking about some tough things. This is a very hopeful podcast, which again, our definition of hope is it has to stand up to real life issues, even death, which is the number one statistic we all have to face. So we hope you get a lot from this podcast. If this brings up something very personal for you, you can email us at hope@crplymouth.co.uk. If you have any general comments, encouragement for us, ideas of other things we can be taking on in this podcast, please interact with us on the socials as well. And that's on Facebook, Instagram, at Hope and the City Podcast. Thank you for tuning in.
When I was 55, I was diagnosed with an incurable cancer. They said I'd have a year to 18 months. I've survived a little bit longer than that. But I suspect, to use Olympic metaphors, I'm on the last lap now. So, yeah.
Right. Oh, so are you having treatment at the moment, or are you...
Last week, I said to my oncologist, I'm having no more treatment.
Right.
And we had a nice chat with the palliative care team.
Yeah.
So, yes, you can guess where that's going.
Yeah.
So I know a bit about Richard's backstory. So, Richard, you were an actor originally, weren't you?
I was for 20 years. God called me into acting. I wanted to be an accountant, but I was too stupid and I hated it anyway. So I became, God's invitation, became an actor.
Okay.
And then about late 90s, I was fed up with traveling around the world, living out of a suitcase, and God opened the door to step out the spotlight and help other people, particularly in business, when they were in the spotlight, raising money, doing speeches, blah, blah, blah.
Wow. Excellent.
So the money was better in business than in acting?
I was earning in half a day or a day what I had been earning in a week.
So it was
a lot is the answer.
So as you said, so we're going back now to 2015, you found out that you had cancer, and perhaps you think maybe linked to your acting days.
Yes, they said it came from asbestos in old theatres. Interestingly, my cancer is called mesothelioma. Asbestos. And actually, when I was with the oncologist and they were telling me I had mesothelioma, one of my sons looked up on a laptop and said, I found a meso joke. I said, what's that then? He said, how do you treat patients with mesothelioma? Don't know. Asbestos you can.
Fine.
I thought it was a good one.
That's one thing we talked about actually the other week, didn't we? On one of our podcasts, we talked about the need on occasions and in relationship of humour, and how that can actually be like a pressure release. How it can actually just change a moment, just change that moment, the intensity of that moment, and just allow that release, that humour. It has to be the right place, the right time, and the right relationship.
Did you find that to be true with your son?
Yeah, definitely. So both my husband and my son my son has had a very dry sense of humour. So we were in Birmingham at one point. He had an amputation, a hindquarter amputation, which is where they take the leg at the hip. And this was in the last 2 years, like between 2020 and 2022. And we were up at the hospital and there was a doctor there who looked a bit like Mr. T out of the A-Team.
Yeah.
And apart from the jewelry, but he was like really ripped, really muscly.
Yeah.
And he walked past and he was amazing. He was so good with James, so good with us as a family. And God just turned to James and went, see that? That's Mr. T. He's going to take off your leg like a chicken wing. But we needed it because we just knew like the seriousness of all that and all the intensive care and everything afterwards. But we just needed those moments
Yep.
of sheer hilarity almost.
Yeah,
That black
yeah.
humor doesn't half come into play, does it? You know,
Yeah,
just
it's wonderful.
to alleviate the pressure in
Yeah.
that moment, you
Yeah.
know?
One of the things we've been talking about, Richard, is that for hope to be real hope, it has to stand up to real life. So
Yeah.
when we're talking about hope, it's not an anesthetic to all the things that we face. It's not an anesthetic to, it's not a denial of it. It's not a turning away from the frustration and the pain and the injustice of it. But, you know, over the last few years, I imagine you've had ups and you've had downs as well. What's that been like? And how have you done that with your family? Have you let them totally into that process? Are you naturally a private person?
I'm naturally a private person, but we decided from the get-go to be completely open about everything.
Wow.
I've got friends who've had cancer and they've been very private. They believe that actually they don't want to cause their children pain, whereas I've taken the opposite view. I want them to know everything and been incredibly vulnerable, which has been difficult for me because I don't like being helped. So I can remember when I was first diagnosed, I went to a church, still go to a church, where, if I'm honest, our CV vicar would love us all to be South American Pentecostals and rather enjoyed illness so that they could, not enjoyed, but it was an opportunity to pray for healing. And a lovely couple came up and said, can we pray for you to be healed? And for me, that was a big kind of barrier to get over, to be willing for somebody to pray for me. And that's been a good journey. And now I have to be helped on and out of a wheelchair. Somebody has to empty the kind of potty thing that I wee into, help me get dressed. I am utterly vulnerable. And that's fine. We all get to that place, don't we? And I can remember during chemo, which for me was pretty brutal in the early days. So I would lose a stone of weight in a week and couldn't move, couldn't open my eyes really. But I felt wrapped in God's love in some extraordinary way. So my hope came from not just words in the Bible, but the literal experience of being loved by God. I can remember I used to go on retreat, which I loved. And an old monk said, prayer is like a newborn baby being held in its mother's arms. And that for me became increasingly the model of just me with nothing being wrapped in God's love. And also what I've come to appreciate is actually I am a soul wrapped in emotion, tissue, blood, bone. I will have good days. I will have crappy days. And God's love for me, the change is not one iota. I used to think if I was good, God loved me more. If I was bad, God might love me less. And I've come to appreciate that that is, to use my favorite word in the English language, utter bollocks. So,
I know that's one of your favorite words.
Yeah.
Richard, that perspective that you bring. I mean, there's a little saying, I think I can't remember who it's credited to. I think ironically a guy called Moody, and he said, my greatest fear is not failure, but of succeeding at all the things that don't really matter.
Yeah.
What has the last 8 years taught you that the previous however many couldn't have?
We have a cancer club at church. So there were a number of us who were diagnosed at the same time. So basically there were 7 or 8 of us. And we meet on Zoom, or actually WhatsApp video, from 9:30 to 10 online before we go to church, 10:30, because some of us can't go to church. And we just share where we're at and pray for each other. It's holy place. And one of those people is a lady called Sandra, very gifted senior accountant. Year and a half ago, breast cancer. Year and a half ago, lost the use of her legs as a nappy. She's in a wheelchair. And she said, two things matter to me now: love, my family, my friends, my church, and the other thing is making a difference. And I think I would completely echo that.
Wow.
For me, making a difference and experiencing the love of those people I love and others, but being able to make a difference, to be able to be, metaphorically speaking, on the pitch, firing some shots, whether it's with talent or treasure or time or that feels that I kind of, if there's a day and you get to the end of it and go, I'm glad to stayed alive for that. That feels a huge privilege, and I wouldn't swap that for a gold medal at the Olympics or winning the Euros or being Zuckerberg, or because to play a part in what Jesus is doing around the world, establishing his kingdom, feels like the most extraordinary privilege in the world.
Yeah.
Richard, that's amazing.
Isn't it phenomenal how in such places of suffering where to the outside world, people might consider it the darkest place, which absolutely, it absolutely is. But how God does something so amazing in that place that could never be done almost in any other place. He just reaches us, doesn't he? And, for where you are now, and I remember like preparing for James passing away, and I just knew that God set that sense of eternity in our hearts, but like not just we read the Bible and we hear about that sense of eternity, but it became so real. And I know that I was listening to one of your podcasts that you did with Simon, is it
Gilbert, yeah.
Gilbert, called Inspired, and in it you were saying about you are looking forward to that time when that day comes to go to heaven. What kind of thing is it that you are anticipating? How are you expecting? And what is it that places that hope in you? What is it about going to heaven that gives you just that sense of hope and comfort during this time?
I'll answer the question. I just go back to, in our cancer club, we have two sayings. One is, all is well and will be well, which is lovely. And then the other one is, God grows roses up through manure. And I think the wonder of God is that he can take the very worst circumstances that we are most terrified of and bring us extraordinary and amazing gifts through it. And we've certainly experienced all of that.
Yeah.
To answer your question, I think what I'm most looking forward to is coming to see what Jesus promised, because Jesus gave hints about what heaven is like, and he said it was a great place. And somebody gave me a book called Imagine Heaven, where somebody compares what the Bible tells us about heaven with near-death experiences recorded. And it's the most exciting, extraordinary book because it explores heaven as a physical place, and we are physical bodies, and what could that look like and feel like? And now, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it is going to be the most amazing place. Not that I understand one word of Revelation, but Jesus said it was an extraordinary place, and I'll take his word for it. I think what I'm really looking forward to is whatever. So Jesus, I think, does not ask us to give. He asks us to invest. He talks about purses. He talks about purses that on this earth are corruptible, moth, rust, destroy. The implication being that actually in eternity, they are purses. So what do they contain? What's good? I would say this side of eternity, when I have chosen to invest in what God is doing, the joy that I get from that is just phenomenal. There's this wonderful phrase called habituation, which means that, I don't know, you buy a nice car. For the first 3 months, it feels great. And then it feels like you're driving a Renault 5, which is fourth hand. So things that feel really exciting become normalized. Whereas I think when we invest in what God is doing, the reverse happens. It becomes more and more exciting. And certainly as I look back at my life, I'm so excited, potentially, when I get to heaven, to see what my tiny, 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 tiny contribution has done. So John Lennox has written a book about investing time and treasure and talent in the kingdom. And he talks about, do you remember the story that Jesus talks about the steward who buys friends with the money that he has?
Mm-hmm.
And John said, maybe when we invest in what God's doing, we actually are making friends all over the world. And actually, when we get to heaven, maybe part of our treasure is to meet those friends and to be able to share our stories. Apart from seeing Jesus face to face, that seems to me the most exciting thing. And that really excites me. It really excites me in the way that if you look at the Euros, when gifted players are allowed to go on the pitch and express their God-given talent, that's a wonderful thing. Now, for many years, the church expected me to do things that I was frankly awful at. Was I good at talking about my faith? No. Was I hospitable? No. Was I good as a servant of the church on the rota? No, I haven't got a servant bone in my body. But I could do one or two things. And when I felt Jesus say, Richard, come onto the pitch and do those things, that felt so integrated with who he'd made me to be. And that's been the last 25 years. Not the first 20 years of my Christian life, that was pretty dull. But the last 25 years have been so exciting because of that, I think.
That's like a sense of almost that yielded, isn't it? When he calls us to act and we yield to his purposes really and to his plans, isn't it? And it's just like, I guess, trying to let down our own in order to step out onto the field and play for him rather than for ourselves or for the world, isn't it?
But what was so exciting is Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be. Now, the implication of that, I think, is, for example, with money, when he asked me to give above and beyond, whatever, to begin with, I was hugely resistant because I wanted to hold on to my money. But when I actually did, I suddenly became really excited about doing that. And when he asked me for a bit of my time to help preachers, I was hugely resistant to that. But when I did, it became incredibly exciting. So you've got this bizarre situation where Jesus says, I've given you this stuff. Do you want to use it for my kingdom? My initial response is always no, no, and no. But when I do, suddenly it becomes more exciting than anything else. And that's the miracle of it, I think.
Wow. Richard, I think that's amazing. I've, when I got to the point where at 25, I had the Porsche, the Lotus, the flat in Henley-on-Thames, etc. And it didn't make me happy. And I know there are so many people who have got to positions well beyond that, who have told us from the top, there's nothing here.
Yeah.
And I think that hope for me, perhaps what I'm learning is hope is really about the goals that we set. And so if I've got the right goals, then I can be hopeful of achieving them, because there are some goals I can hope for them all I want, but I'm not going to make it.
Yeah.
I'm now over 40, which means my professional football career is
Yeah.
it's a distant dream. Looks fade, financial crashes happen, property is less valuable. There's so many things about ourselves and about the world that are outside of our control, that they're not who we're born to be. They're not what we're destined to be, or frankly, if it's just about popularity, it's just such a competitive world that someone's got to win and someone's got to lose.
Yeah.
So actually, if they're your goals, then after a while it becomes hopeless, particularly in this day and age. And I think of so many friends of mine, around Plymouth, and life is tough. I get that it's tough for a lot of people. And I don't want to say all hopelessness and depression is self-inflicted, but I wonder if there's a message that you might share from your own experience that says it's not all self-inflicted, but be aware of the message you're being told on a day-to-day basis. And actually, there's another message, which is to say, if you've got the right goals, then there is actually nothing standing in the way of you achieving them. Go on, Richard.
I've got a little post-it note that I look at when I'm in my bed. It's on the end of my bed. And I think Jesus is marching orders to me every day. And it says this, and it's from one of the devotional I love: be just a channel of helpfulness for others. In a way, the picture God gave me is I am a McDonald's straw. God pours in his life-giving water at the top, not a chocolate milkshake, but life-giving water. And my sole job is to allow it to flow through and be directed where he wants. I am, well, I'm pretty unbranded. It gets soggy, it gets thrown away, life ends. But the joy of being able to pass what God's given me on, I think that for me is deeply hopeful, the difference we can make. So give you one example. There's a guy called Robert Glover working in China and Vietnam now and other countries, and he takes children in orphanages and facilitates them to be adopted into families. Now, because a child shouldn't be in an orphanage. They should be brought up in a home. Some total cost of doing that for one child is 20 quid. 20 quid. So where does hope come from? 20 quid to change a child's upbringing, life, their future prospects. Or I'm looking at a picture of a young woman in the northern part of Uganda. There's an organization that will take this woman who's completely illiterate, help her to learn how to read and write and count and save money. And when you can do all of those things, you can start a small business. Then you can become independent. And because you're independent, you get less sexual abuse from your partner. You're able to fund your children to go to school. You can build a roof on your house. You can be resistant when a famine comes. Now, that costs in total 150 quid. 150 quid to enable one woman, one family, and their children's families to become independent and confident and economically viable is the most extraordinary bang for the buck, I think. So I think for me, hope is where we can make a difference in the knowledge that whatever we do in God's name, he multiplies a millionfold. And that for me is more exciting than anything.
Absolutely. That's incredible, isn't it? Absolutely.
There's always a vacancy. There's always a vacancy to help someone who's lonely, isn't there? There's always a vacancy to give what you've got to someone who needs it. There's always a vacancy to be the answer to somebody else's prayer. And you've sort of given me a visual picture there where I can think of someone could be in my city, but they could be on the other side of the world, who, whether they've got a faith or not, is almost crying out at the ceiling, or they're on their knees and just saying, look, please, can I just have some relief from this? And you get the opportunity to be the answer to someone else's prayers.
And also, Rob, the weaker I am, the more I'm receiving. I'll give you an example. In the last 2 or 3 weeks, even standing up causes me massive strain in terms of being able to have enough breath. So I was taking, 40 minutes to get up my stairs. I'd have to stop every 4 or 5 and sit down for 5 minutes, get my breath back. My dear friend, Stephen Barbie, who go to our church and have made it their special mission to look after me, said, Richard, it's fine. They went back to their house. They brought back a bed. They put it up for me downstairs of their love. And that has transformed my existence over the last 3 or 4 days. So it's not just about me giving, it's about me learning to receive and be loved. And that's not been easy for me. But I'm so grateful that God has created this community that we call church, where people notice each other's leads. And it's blowing my children away. They almost can't believe that it's happening. So I receive so much love, practical love, and spiritual love. It's just wonderful.
That's amazing. We, when James was ill, actually, we, because the kids are across different schools and like my husband's born and bred in Plymouth, we kind of just know a lot of people. We go to a large church. And one of the things we started to do was to keep a blog. of James's journey, partly because of the Chinese whispers,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
unintentionally. People aren't intentionally kind of misdirecting their information, but it just so that everybody knew everything all at the same time. And I have to say, I think up until that point, I probably had a little bit of battle with pride because I'd say I would much rather be giving help than receiving it. And
Yes.
the real lesson in humility, for me, it was a real lesson in, and it almost seemed easier at times to say, do you know what? It's okay. We're all right. We're okay. Which would be my normal default setting. We can manage. We can manage. We're independent. We're self-sufficient. But actually, in the absolute brokenness, um, God surrounded us with this amazing community of people, and I saw his plan of community, his plan of fellowship, and his plan for people to be in relationship with one another in a very different way. And actually, that within that we can experience Jesus more completely. It was just quite a revelation.
And what I've noticed is, when you become a Christian, you sign up to giving God control over your life. And to be honest, I've tried to run away from his control for the last 45 years. But gradually, actually, I've lost control. Physically, I don't know when I'm going to stop breathing. I find it almost very hard just to stand up, let alone walk. But what I've noticed is my life has never been better ordered. He gives me the right balance of rest and doing stuff to be paid and unpaid. And it's extraordinary that actually, and the truth is he runs the universe, so he's good at this stuff. But actually,
Yeah.
that's been a wonderful cause of hope too, that in his arms,
Yeah.
I am safe. I am safe. He will carry me through to the door of eternity and beyond. And I couldn't imagine doing this without him.
No.
Would seem, well, impossible.
Well, Emma did share, didn't you, in the first episode that you knew God to be real, not just in the ways that you'd learned in church services and Sunday schools, but real. And sometimes it was felt, but you still knew. And sometimes it wasn't felt, but you still knew.
Yeah. I mean, and certainly in the weeks after James, there was just, and even actually when I think about it, um, as you know, with a cancer journey, it can be very up and down.
Yeah.
And there were lots of times where we were like, I think this is it. James is on the decline now. This is the beginning kind of the end. And then he would rally and then we would have a bit more time and then he would decline again. And through that process, I think, God was really sowing in us something about the hope of eternity.
Yeah.
And to the point that when James passed, he just had that comfort. He knew where he was going. And I think Carl and I, my husband and I, and his older brother Tom and younger sister Abby, we were praying. He died on a Sunday evening, and it was like the Sunday afternoon, and we were praying for him. And he had his arms out like he was holding his arms up to a father. Like a toddler holds their arms up to a father.
Yeah.
And James, he was huge. He was 6'4". He was gangly and long, and big. And he had his arms out like he was waiting to be lifted up by his heavenly Father. And I think even for all of us, like we were, witnessing this, it felt like that veil between heaven and earth was just so thin.
Wow.
And so transient in that time. And it's not something that you can even describe in words or even in the physical. It's just something deep in your soul.
Yeah.
That, and even like afterwards, I felt extremely broken and it felt very dark and very sad after James, but God was so gracious and gave us such hope. So one of the weeks after James had passed away, we had a communion at church and we have a balcony and couldn't really hold much conversation with people because I was just tired and just to turn up was a huge thing. And we were having communion and God put this picture in my eyes that as I looked over our church auditorium and we were having the bread and the wine, the tokens, the wafer and the small cups of wine, that actually these were the mere crumbs that were falling from the heavenly banquet. And that actually James and everybody who is there is enjoying this amazing feast at this beautiful banquet table. And what we enjoy here on earth is the mere crumbs of what is to come, the glory that is to come. And, just in that, it stirred up the hope that is within, that God, he put that in our hearts, didn't he? He put the hope of
Yep.
eternity in us. And he was, I believe, showing me that it was there, that it was almost just beyond the veil of where I could touch, where I could reach. And it felt like a pair of net curtains almost, where my fingers were touching the net curtains and pushing them,
Yep.
but I couldn't go through them. Just, God is good in that.
I was thinking, if you go back to sporting metaphor, for example, where is hope? Sometimes this cancer journey has felt like a marathon without a finishing line, and where the gradient gets steeper and steeper and steeper, and I am physically exhausted. And there's a part of me, rather like Paul, that goes, of course I want to stay and hang around and be with those I love, but actually there's a part of me that just wants to stop. And if you're going on the marathon route, you don't see the end until you turn a corner and you see the finishing line. And I think part of that hope is actually to come to that finishing line, because the stuff that you're coping with is going to end. This pain, whether it's physical pain or other forms of pain, is going to end, and it's not going to be there. And what it's going to be replaced with is a new body, and actually a functioning body, and seeing Jesus face to face, and encountering friends you've made in this life who you've never met, and that meal, physical meal, which the Bible promises. And so for me, when I left my college's meeting, Freddie said to me, well, beforehand, he said it's going to be my son. He said it's going to be Terminal 5, or it's going to be All Clear Avenue, isn't it? And when I left the meeting, he said it's going to be Terminal 5. And actually, it was quite a good metaphor, because the truth is, my life, compared to most people in the world, is lived and has been lived in the Gold Star Lounge in Terminal 5. It's a life of undiluted luxury. I've never had to worry about food or clothes or a roof over my head or a bed at night. I've had all of those things. At some point, my flight is going to be called. I suspect it's going to be very soon. And where I'm going is seat 1A on a private jet to the most wonderful place in the universe. The difficult bit is the onboarding bit. It's the leaving the lounge and making your way onto the plane. So I have the hope of where I'm going. It's the bit in between that's the challenge, I think.
And I guess as well, when you board that plane, Jesus is going to be seat 1B.
Yeah. Well, he'll probably be 1A, to be honest with you. He gets dibs, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does.
But yeah, so that's part of the hope, that at the end of all of this, there is the end of suffering. And that's a wonderful thought, to be honest, because I really am, exhausted.
And that's why we appreciate so much, Richard, your time today. That's, I've just appreciated so much of everything you've ever shared with me, but just your friendship from the first time at a canteen in a university, you sat down and chatted to me. You're just such a wonderful people person. Just can't express really how much your friendship means to me. It's been so special. And even today, I'm just thinking, wow, I hope you haven't said anything to sort of pull me up short on my shortcomings, but I just feel so ungrateful. I think that's as well as sad, and I think that's
why ungrateful,
because I think you have come to see things that you are so grateful for, and I think I spend so much of time worrying about what I haven't got and just not stopping and considering the things that I do. And I think perhaps that's just life. It's so much of it is trying to get through and, trying to get this and get that, not even luxuries, but gratitude. It just enables you to stop, to take stock, for it to actually register the important things that you do have. And you've reminded me of that. I feel that.
I think what's been really interesting for me is this whole thing about gratitude. Have either of you read a book by a lady called Anne Voskamp called A Thousand Gifts?
No.
No.
So she was a Canadian farmer's wife, homeschooling 6 children. And she didn't have enough time. She was very stressed. Her sister was run over by a tractor when she was about 4. And she was somewhat bitter towards God. And a friend of hers said, listen, you're stuck in the middle of the prairies. Why don't you try thanking God for, rather like the books that say, go to 100 places before you die, why don't you try thanking God for 1,000 things? Each night she'd go out into a little shed and she'd write in a journal, number 1. And I think the first one was the sunshine, rainbows on soap suds as she washed some clothes. She'd write that down. Anyway, her book, 1,000 Gifts from God, inspired me to actually, her point was, Jesus often said, thank you, before he did something extraordinary. And I've never been taught to say thank you. Anne Voskamp's point is, you can actually train yourself to look for things to be grateful for. Long story cut short, I started a journal. I'm not really a righty person. But then I started taking photos on my Instagram account. I didn't want to share my Instagram account. It wasn't for other people. It was just my photo album. And every day I would try and take a photo. And it's called 1,000 Gifts from God. But I love it because it's teaching me to hunt out things to be grateful for. And I think my brain is being transformed. And every morning I try and thank God 10 things. I'll see if I can remember them. Am I alive? Yes. Do I have a home that I can live in, a roof over my head? Yes. Do I have at least some money? Yes. Do I have clothes and food? Yes, I do. Does God give me things to do, paid and unpaid? Yes. Do I have family who love me? Yes. Do I have friends who love me? Yes. Can I go to a church without being arrested? Am I still breathing? And does God love me? And every day, pretty much, all of those are true.
Mm-hmm.
And so my life is statistically 10 out of 10. But that I'm trying to get that discipline of deliberately looking for things to be thankful for. And surprise, surprise, there are always things to be thankful for because we're surrounded with them, I think. And God's been teaching me to look. I think that's the point.
Yeah. I think
rather like an Easter egg hunt. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I think there is an element, isn't there, of in society that we take life for granted, don't we? The days that we have, until we're faced with sickness, suffering, and impending end of life on this earth. I think we take for granted. We almost have an attitude of immortality until we're forced to really examine that. And I think we also have an attitude of entitlement as well. That we are entitled to have a home and money and all the comforts of life. But actually, when we really change and have an attitude of gratitude, it changes, doesn't it? That we aren't entitled to anything. We aren't granted anything. Nothing's guaranteed, is it? And apart from our eternity is guaranteed. And it's just, I love the idea of writing the list as well. I was sharing with Rob earlier in the week, actually, that after I had my eldest son, just that overwhelming sense of being a new mum. And I had quite some degree of postnatal depression. And a very good friend of mine, who was a wise Christian friend, came around with a notebook and a pen, and she said, I want you to write just a couple of things down every single day you're thankful for. Thankful for the air in your lungs, thankful that the sun shone today, that you managed to get the washing on the line, but be thankful. And actually it was really pivotal in that, that we need to shake off this sense of entitlement and this just this assumption that life's on our terms.
One of my favorite times of the year is on New Year's Eve. I go through my Instagrams for the last year, and I pick the top 35 and I get them made into a poster. And that is something that I display in our kitchen. And that's the year, composed of wonderful, amazing moments.
If you tell us about these poems, Richard, because the little you shared of me is you probably had, we didn't have the same upbringing, but I think you once called yourself emotionally castrated.
Absolutely.
But these poems that you were given are emotional. They're about your relationship with the Lord. And also people in Plymouth will know them because when we went through COVID, when I went through a time in my life, I seemed to be taking an inordinate number of funerals. When I think I had 4 or 5 friends with cancer at the same time, I was sharing your poems with them. And so tell us a bit about them.
I was diagnosed in 2015, went through chemo, surgery, blah. The cancer came back in 18. And at the time, I was due to visit Israel. And I visited Israel on the first day. I was in the Garden of Gethsemane. And it felt very dark. I would say my hope was diminished. And that evening, you normally get a break before supper to kind of journal, do whatever. And I opened my journal. And when I applied pen to paper, it felt like it wasn't me. It felt like Jesus speaking to me, giving me a commentary on the day. And somewhat bizarrely, it was in the form of poetry. So anyway, I wrote these words down. They just came, flowed. And I read it out when we gathered together downstairs. And one lady started to cry. And she said, "That speaks absolutely to me." And interestingly, the next day, Jesus did the same thing in the evening. He gave me another poem. And this happened for I think it was a 2-week trip, 10 days. And then sort of on average every month since then, exactly the same, on different subjects and different fields. And I was encouraged to kind of put them in a book, but also to do them on a podcast. So I've recorded them on a podcast called Jesus Here, Here, which you can download. But that's the story of the poems. And I was that emotionally castrated public school boy who was sent away at the age of 8 and locked their heart away for good. So yeah, that's the story of the poems.
That's incredible.
Have you heard them, Emma?
I heard one that you shared with I'm just thinking Simon Gilbert. That's it. That's how you say his name. Gilbert on the Inspired. But do you have one to hand at all, Richard?
I don't, and I can't get up.
That's absolutely fine. We might, if with your permission,
of course.
Rob said he's got some of them, and maybe we would like to share one or two of them.
The first one is probably very good if people are going through stuff. The very first one.
That would be amazing.
We'll dig it out and cut it in here.
Sometimes when you think of running your race, you worry you won't last the pace. All the motivation you had is gone. You simply don't want to carry on. All you feel is dry and dead, not alive or free or loved or led, unable to face the road ahead. Instead of running, you'd rather stop. Instead of climbing, you'd rather drop. At times, all you want to do is sin. Instead of resisting, you want to give in. Like Jonah, you want to run away and not have to face another day. Whenever this is the case, my friend, do you really believe that this is the end? Because it's not. Do you really believe that you're unique in feeling your life is pointless and bleak? You're not the first, and you won't be the last who feels that they're not up to the task. Every pain that you now feel is a pain that in my life was real. To me too. Were there times, do you think, in my 30-odd years that I, the Son of God, shed tears? Remember my night at Gethsemane when I wanted so very much to be free from the prospect of pain and strife, free from the Father's call on my life. But I chose instead to say yes and obey, not to give up and walk away, to fulfill my calling and do what is right, to say no to temptation and fight my fight. And that is what I ask you to do, for the sake of those who depend on you, those whose lives will be greatly blessed because you didn't fail your test. And the good news is, the strength you need to battle through doesn't actually come from you. Because I'm yours, and because you're mine, because you're a branch, and because I'm the vine, the strength you need comes from me, my friend. It's a strength you receive, a strength I send, strength enough to stand and fight, strength enough to be a light, strength enough for the day you face, strength enough to run your race. For I am God, your closest friend, and I'm by your side till the very end. In this fight, you're never alone. You're never, ever on your own. So whenever the road seems dark and long, and you don't really feel you can carry on, just take a moment and turn to me. Turn to the one who has set you free. Turn to the one who is always there. Give me the load that's too heavy to bear. And whenever the enemy says retreat, whenever your thoughts are consumed with defeat, open your eyes and once again see that you have my authority. The authority to tell him to go, the authority to stand and say no, the authority of a son of the King, to battle evil and conquer sin and fight to bring my kingdom in.
So Richard has given me a lot of help in my life. What I feel called to is to help communicate a bit about my faith and about life and all life things. And Richard once gave me a mug as a prompt or a prop, and on the bottom of it or down the handle, I can't remember. I think it was on the bottom, Richard. It said, "What if this was your last sermon?" And I thought, wow, we don't know how long we've got. We don't know, how important particular opportunities are to have say a kind word, say something that's real, that's honest, that's hope. But for people in Plymouth who don't know you too well, they probably won't speak to you again.
No.
And our hope is that you get to meet them in heaven. But if you were not our hope for you, but for them, but what would you say?
There's a German theologian called Karl Barth who wrote, I guess, hundreds of books on deep theological issues. And towards the end of his life, some Americans flew across to partake of his wisdom. And they said, Dr. Barth, at the end of all of your study, could you give us some insight about God and truth? And he looked at them and he said, Jesus loves me, this I know, because the Bible tells me so. And I would say the world is constantly selling an answer to fill the hole that we have, and an answer that doesn't fill the hole. The world says, if you make yourself physically beautiful, you'll be all right. If you get a senior position in a business, you'll be great. If you have enough money, you'll be great. If you go on enough holidays, you'll be great. If you have enough stuff or a nice car or this or this or this or that. And I think I would say to anybody going through stuff or not going through stuff, Jesus Christ is real. God is real. We can't see him. We can't hear him, but actually he's real. And he created everything that we see. And let's not blame him for what's going on, because for what's going on, that's our stuff.
Yeah.
Ukraine isn't God's fault. Ukraine is Russia's fault. Gaza isn't God's fault. It's the fault of forgiveness, resentment, anger, fear. If you measured the amount of food that in the West we waste every year, that would be enough to feed easily all those who don't have food.
Mm.
So I would say to anybody, God desperately wants a relationship with you. He's your Father. He created you. He loves you. And all he invites you to do is to turn to him. Now, there's a word for that, which is repent. I don't like that word, but actually it's just, he's standing there with his arms open wide, and he longs to accept you, forgive you, love you, lead you, guide you, fill you with his peace, his love, his joy. Then all we have to do is to turn to him. But he is real. And that's been my experience for the good times, and also for these times, it's been a little bit tougher. And he's real whether you feel him or not.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Hope and the City. We hope you found it useful, and we're really glad that you've joined us. It would be great if you have any comments, any feedback, questions, or anything that you'd like us to look into in the future. If you'd get in touch on
hope@crplymouth.co.uk. Actually, we're thinking about doing a whole episode dedicated to people's questions and responses to some of the things that have come up. So do interact with us. I've given the email, and on the socials as well, @Hope and the City podcast. Thank you again for listening.